Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday edition of Frankenstein Tea. Frankenstein Tea is a daily program from the Island Free Library with me. I'm Kristen. I'm the director of the Island Free Library. I have a couple of great stories today. I think I'm gonna read two. I don't usually read two, but I'm feeling like I might read two. It's kind of that kind of day. It's a great day for Frankenstein Tea, so I hope you find me and start listening in and get yourself tea. In my view of this camera, you can tell mine is steaming hot. It's good today. I want to do a short public announcement here, in that I'd really love it if everybody could go over to YouTube and sign on as a subscriber to the Island Free Library YouTube channel. That's not so much that, I want all these subscribers and the fame, fortune, and all of that. That's not it at all. But if I get 100 subscribers, the URL becomes Island Free Library. And so that will be very helpful for people to find us. And to be able to participate with us as patrons of the library, if we could get that. Right now, it's just that, predetermined, random set of letters and numbers that YouTube generates. But after 100 subscribers, it can become Island Free Library in the URL. So that's a plea. Go over to YouTube and subscribe. Do that for all the patrons that struggle with technology, and I say that with a smirk, but I mean that seriously. A lot of people out there struggling with that, so it will be easiest and better organized on our YouTube channel. We hope to work on that in the next few weeks. That's how long our current shelter in place has been determined for, 2 weeks. So hang in there with us while we do that. And I also feel like we'll use the YouTube beyond this COVID crisis, that it's going to be a great tool for the library to use. So I hope that you all start getting used to it. I want to say one other thing about Frankenstein Tea today. It is just a time for us to sit together. I treat it as a timeout. As you know, you've heard me use that language before in my introduction. A chance for me to read to you. I kind of want to emphasize that today, because as I move further and further away from what would be really legally permissible for me to do, I want to stress that this would be, as if you were in the library and we were having a book club. This by no means is recordings that are, again, going to bring fame or fortune to anyone. So I want to stress that, and just and hope that that's what you're looking for also. A way to stay connected to the library staff, your friends at the library, things that you do there, things that you like about it, and a way for us to stay connected to you. So that's my intro. I hope you're ready for some stories. Let me have a sip of tea. Today's stories go from someone who's widely popular and I had never read, which is always fun for me. Of course, that would be fun for me. And it's from a collection by David Sedaris, and the collection is called Squirrel Seeks Chipmunk by David Sedaris, published by Little Brown and Company, and it was published in 2010. There are illustrations by Ian Faulkner. This is David Sedaris. I'm going to read short stories from this book. I'm going to start with the longer one, although neither of them are long, and let's see if we get to the second one. Maybe we'll do it tomorrow, maybe we'll do it today. This is David Sedaris, Squirrel Seeks Chipmunk. This story is called The Faithful Setter. Back before I met her, my wife lived on a farm. It was a small operation, organic vegetables, pick your own strawberries, and a dozen or so chickens, each and every one of them, to hear her tell it, an absolute raging asshole. The first time she said this, I laughed. as I'd always thought that word was reserved for males. The same goes for dick, which he uses for females all the time. This raccoon, for example, that sometimes gets into our garbage cans, can you believe the nerve of that dick? She'll say to me, her nose pressed flat against the dining room window. Then she'll bark, "Hey, asshole, go trash somebody else's fucking yard." I attribute my wife's language to the fact that she's only quarter spaniel. She says she's only an eighth, but come on, the ears say it all. That and her mouth. Still, though, I can't help but love her. Forgave her even after she cheated. "They are too your children," she'd said, referring to her last litter, a party of 4 that looked no more like me than that dick of a raccoon. I know they were fathered by the English bull terrier across the street, but what are you going to do? Everyone's entitled to one mistake, aren't they? I'd like to tell you that I hated this terrier right from the start, that I'd never for one moment trusted him. But what would that say about my wife and me? That our tastes are that dissimilar? If you want to know the truth about it, I actually hadn't given the guy much thought. His ugliest, I'd noticed, sure. His ugliness, I'd noticed, sure. Those creepy little eyes. His stupidity was evident as well. But I can't say I fashioned a formal opinion, at least not until this puppy business. The litter was born, and not 1 week later, the bull terrier bit a kid in the face, practically tore it right off, as a matter of fact. It was the little blonde girl who lived in the house next door to him. I was in the back seat of the car, just pulling into the driveway when the ambulance arrived, and, man, was that ever a scene. The parents were beside themselves. "Oh well," my wife yawned when I told her about it later that afternoon. "It's not like they can't have more children." I said, "Come again?" She said, "That's the way they feel about us, so why should we be any different?" "So we need to stoop to their level," I said. As for the bull terrier, my wife admitted that he was a hothead. She said he had a lousy sense of humor, but she never quite denounced him the way I needed her to. After he was trundled away and put down, she spent the day sulking. "A headache," she said to the kids. "Mommy has a sick headache." She claimed to have one the following day as well. On and on for a week, and all the while she had her eye on the house across the street, the place where her boyfriend had lived. It wasn't long afterward that the little girl came home from the hospital, her head cocooned in bandages. There were holes for her to look through and others for her nose and mouth, all of them gunked up with the corresponding fluids, tears, snot, drool. Even if you hated children, you had to feel sorry for her. At least you thought you had to. My wife, though, I could see that she blamed this girl, thinking that were it not for her, the bull terrier would still be alive. I figured she'd get over him eventually, and in the meantime, I'd just settle back and be patient. It helped when our owner put an ad in the paper and got rid of those godforsaken puppies. Oh, sure, I cried, but it was more for my wife than for myself. I don't care what you hear about step-parenting, it's just not the same when they're somebody else's kids. Don't get me wrong, I wish them the best. I just don't feel the need to see them again. Now that it was just the two of us, I hoped that things would return to normal. It was then that our owner took my wife in for her hysterectomy. She was out cold for the operation, saw nothing, felt nothing, went to sleep fertile, and woke up and whatever else was in there, gone. I told her that as far as I was concerned, it didn't matter in the least. To this she growled, "Oh, I'm sure it doesn't. I'm sure you're just fine with it." I said, "What are you talking about?" "You're thinking that this will keep me from cheating on you again, or that if I do, at least nothing will come of it." It was like she was blaming me for the hysterectomy. I said, "Baby, don't do this." She didn't talk to me for 3 days after that. What was going through her mind is anyone's guess. Me, though, I kept thinking about this Weimaraner I met once at the dog run. He had one of those owners who got on all fours and tried to communicate with him, not just barking, but lying on his back, acting submissive, and so forth. There are quite a few people like that at the dog run. Nuts is what they are. But this guy really took the cake. One morning last fall, he went to the hospital and had his tonsils taken out. They weren't raw or swollen or anything. He just wanted them. In a jar, he supposedly told the doctor, and don't trim off the fat. At the end of the day, he returned home, cut the tonsils into pieces with a steak knife, and hand-fed them to this Weimaraner, like, "Here, boy, I love you so much, I want you to have a part of me." "And?" I said. "It was a lot like chicken," the Weimaraner told me. So that's what I wondered during the time my wife and I weren't talking. What did her hysterectomy taste like? It was crazy, I know, but I couldn't get it out of my mind. Did my thoughts bespeak an urge toward cannibalism? Or did the flesh in question, the fact that it was her uterus, reduce this to a normal sexual fantasy? I would have liked to have discussed it, but the way things stood, I thought it best to keep my mouth shut. It was right about then, my wife wanting her boyfriend back and me entertaining these insane dark thoughts, that the bandaged girl reappeared. It seemed there were some complications, an infection or something, and she had to go back to the hospital. We saw her through the living room window, just briefly, getting into the car with her parents. "Little Miss Priss," my wife muttered, the first words out of her mouth and what felt like forever. Then she limped into the den and lay down in front of the TV. This is her way of being alone, as I hate the television. The programs are beside the point. It's the machine itself I can't bear. It stinks to high heaven, so I always stop at the doorway and park myself just this side of the carpet. "That's right, Mr. Snob," my wife said. She always calls me this when we disagree about something, whether it's a chew toy or the smell of an electrical appliance. "I guess I'm not just as well-bred as you," she'll say. And it's true. She's not. It's also true that she's the one forever bringing it up. It's her own insecurity talking, the tragic self-hatred of a mixed-breed country girl. So I try to let it slide. My wife mentions my bloodline when she's ticked off, of course, and then again whenever I get sent out on a stud call, which is not the same as cheating. I don't care what you hear. Infidelity involves a choice, while this is arranged by forces beyond my control. These females don't want me any more than I want them, I tell my wife. It's not an affair. It's work. It's my job, for God's sake. She says that if it's a paycheck I'm after, I could just as easily lug around a blind person. Or better yet, sniff out contraband. You and that selective nose that hates the TV but loves the smell of a book. Not all books, I tell her. And it's true. I can't stand thrillers. It was in the midst of our difficulties, my wife's stitches still tender, that I was sent to service a female a few hours west of our home. Normally it's just, hello, goodbye, but the land is beautiful in that part of the world. It's wooded, with lots of hills, so rather than waiting for me to finish, my owner decided to drop me off and spend the rest of the day nosing around in his car. The act itself, it's hard to think of it as sex, lasted no more than a minute. Then this female and I got to talking. She's pure Irish setter, just like me, so we have that in common. Both of us had hookworms when we were young, and both of us, very coincidentally, love the taste and texture of candles. As long as they're not scented, she said. The worst are those cheap vanilla candles, I offered. She agreed, adding that the cheap part was redundant. All vanilla-scented candles are cheap. I told her about a cinnamon-scented candle I'd once chewed on as a puppy, and she howled with her sympathetic disgust. I thought of my wife and of how we would have sounded to her ears. Arrogant, she would have called us. Noses so high in the air you can't smell your own farts. This for the crime of preferring one thing over another. You know what else I hate? I said to the female. I hate air fresheners, coconut being the worst. Well, I don't know, she said. I think a pretty good case could be built against wild cherry. Oh my God, wild cherry, I said, and I hunched my shoulders, pretending to barf. From air fresheners, we wandered on to padded toilet seats, novelty mailboxes, and labradoodles. She just started in on light jazz when I suggested we try the breeding thing one more time, in case the first go didn't work. Don't have to ask me twice, she said. I didn't have to ask at all for round 3, and the one after that just seemed to happen on its own. An aftershock, the female called it. Some might define this as cheating, but I just call it being thorough. Then, too, I was completely upfront about my marital status, practically from the start. Your wife? The female said. So how did that happen? I told her how we were married by my owner's girlfriend. Now former girlfriend, I said. I don't know how binding it is, but I wouldn't want to be with anyone else. And it's true. I wouldn't. Among other things, I like the fact that my wife needs me. Without my guidance, she's sure to finish what her boyfriend started. The child across the street would be mangled even worse. And for what? This is not you, I keep telling her. For now, though, it's as if she's under a spell. I explained this to the female as best I could, and after I'd finished, she cocked her head. So your wife was brainwashed by an English bull terrier? Something like that. God, she said, I hate English bull terriers. That was when we had the aftershock. It was almost dusk when the owner arrived, and he and I headed off for home. The air conditioner was on, but after some whining, I got him to lower the window. I had my head out, and we'd been on the road for no more than 20 minutes when we came upon a burning building. It was a house, 3 stories tall, with a low brick wall around it. The owner pulled over, and before he could stop me, I jumped over the seat and joined him on the grass. Had my wife been with me, he'd have forced us back into the car. But I'm pretty reliable, even without a leash. Besides, I make him look good, much more interesting than he actually is. A small crowd had begun to gather, encircling a barefoot woman with sweatpants on. As we moved closer, I saw that she was holding a dachshund, the type with long hair. Everyone watched as she pushed back his ears, repeatedly kissing his forehead, while he twisted and begged to be let down. It was only when an old man arrived and gathered the woman in an embrace that the dog broke free. He and I got to talking, and I learned he was the single thing this woman had reached for when she smelled the smoke and realized that her house was on fire. Which is nice and everything. Don't get me wrong, the dachshund said, but she's got a teenage son in there. He gestured toward a second-floor window with black smoke pouring out of it. He and his mother were constantly at each other's throats, but he was always nice to me. Poor kid. The dachshund let out a sigh, and as the woman reached down to snatch him back up, I caught a glimpse of the poor guy's future. I could have saved anything, and I chose you. Who wants to live with that kind of pressure? As I wished him good luck, the firemen arrived. A group of 3 headed toward the house and were almost there when a part of the roof collapsed. Sparks shot into the darkening sky, and as they sputtered down to earth, I caught the scent of burning flesh and realized how hungry I was. With any luck, the owner would stop on our way home and buy us each a hamburger wrapped in paper. Then, smelling of smoke and ketchup, I'd return to my hangdog wife and continue the long business of loving her. That was The Faithful Setter from David Sedaris, a book called Squirrel Seeks Chipmunk. I'm going to read a short one. Again, I don't usually do two, but it is a rainy day for Frankenstein tea. I'm going to have a sip of tea. I hope everybody sits back and enjoys another one. The Squirrel and the Chipmunk. The squirrel and the chipmunk had been dating for 2 weeks when they ran out of things to talk about. Acorns, parasites, the inevitable approach of autumn. These subjects had been covered within their first hour, and so breathlessly their faces had flushed. Twice they had long conversations about dogs, each declaring an across-the-board hatred of them, and speculating on what life might be like were someone to put a bowl of food in front of them 2 times a day. They're spoiled rotten is what it comes down to, the chipmunk had said, and the squirrel had placed his paw over hers, saying, "That's it exactly. Finally, someone who really gets it." Friends had warned them that their romance could not possibly work out, and such moments convinced them that the skeptics were not just wrong, but jealous. "They'll never have what we do," the squirrel would say, and then the two of them would sit quietly, hoping for a flash flood or a rifle report, something, anything that might generate a conversation. They were out one night at a little bar run by a couple of owls, when following a long silence, the squirrel slapped his palm against the tabletop. "You know what I like?" he said. "I like jazz." "I didn't know that," the chipmunk said. "My goodness, jazz?" She had no idea what jazz was, but worried that asking would make her sound stupid. "What kind exactly?" she asked, hoping his answer might narrow things down a bit. "Well, all kinds, really," he told her, "especially the earlier stuff." "Me too," she said, and when he asked her why, she told him that the latter stuff was too late for her tastes, almost like it was overripe or something. You know what I mean? Then for the 3rd time since she had known him, the squirrel reached across the table and took her paw. On returning home that evening, the chipmunk woke her older sister, with whom she shared a room. "Listen," she whispered, "I need you to explain something. What's jazz?" "Why are you asking me?" the sister said. "So you don't know either?" the chipmunk asked. "I didn't say I didn't know," the sister said. "I asked you why you're asking me. Does this have anything to do with that squirrel?" "Maybe," the chipmunk said. "Well, I'm telling," the sister announced. "First thing tomorrow morning, because this has gone on long enough." She punched out her pillow of moss, then repositioned it beneath her head. "I warned you weeks ago that this wouldn't work out, and now you've got the whole house in an uproar, waltzing home in the middle of the night, waking me up with your dirty little secrets. Jazz indeed. Just you wait until Mother hears about this." The chipmunk lay awake that night, imagining the unpleasantness that was bound to take place the following morning. What if jazz was squirrel slang for something terrible, like anal intercourse? "Oh, I like it too," she'd said, and so eagerly. Then again, it could just be mildly terrible, something along the lines of communism, or fortune-telling subjects that were talked about but hardly ever practiced. Just as she thought she had calmed herself down, a new possibility would enter her mind, each one more horrible than the last. Jazz was the maggot-infested flesh of a dead body, the crust on an infected eye, another word for ritual suicide, and she had claimed to like it. Years later, when she could put it all in perspective, she realized that she had never really trusted the squirrel. How else to explain all those terrible possibilities? Had he been another chipmunk, even a tough one, she'd have assumed that jazz was something familiar, a kind of root, say, or maybe a hairstyle. Of course, her sister hadn't helped any. None of her family had. It's not that I have anything against squirrels per se, her mother had said. It's just that this one, well, I don't like him. When pressed for details, she'd mentioned his fingernails, which were a little too long for her taste. A sure sign of vanity, she warned. And now there's this jazz business. That was what did it. Following the sleepless night, the chipmunk's mother had forced her to break it off. Well, the squirrel had sighed, I guess that's that. I guess it is, the chipmunk said. He headed downriver a few days later, and she never saw him or heard from him again. It's not a great loss, her sister said. No girl should be subjected to language like that, especially from the likes of him. Amen, her mother added. Eventually, the chipmunk met someone else, and after she had safely married, her mother speculated that perhaps jazz was a branch of medicine, something like chiropractic therapy, that wasn't quite legitimate. Her sister said no, it was more likely a jig, and then she pushed herself back from the table and kicked her chubby legs into the air. Oh, you, her mother said, that's a can-can. And then she joined in and gave a few kicks of her own. This stuck in the chipmunk's mind, as she never knew her mother could identify a dance step or anything associated with fun. It was the way her own children would eventually think of her, dull, strict, chained to the past. She had boys, all of them healthy, and only one prone to trouble. He had a habit of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but his heart was good, and the chipmunk knew he would eventually straighten himself out. Her husband thought so too, and died knowing that he had been correct. A month or two after he passed on, she asked this son what jazz was. And when he told her it was a kind of music, she knew instinctively that he was telling the truth. Is it bad music? She asked. Well, if it's played badly, he said. Otherwise, it's really quite pleasant. Did squirrels invent it? God, no, he said. Whoever gave you that idea? The chipmunk stroked her brown and white muzzle. Nobody, she said. I was just guessing. When her muzzle grew more white than brown, the chipmunk forgot that she and the squirrel had had nothing to talk about. She forgot the definition of jazz as well, and came to think of it as every beautiful thing she had ever failed to appreciate. The taste of warm rain, the smell of a baby, the din of a swollen river, rushing past her tree, and onward to infinity. Two stories today from David Sedaris's book, Squirrel Meets Chipmunk, published by Little Brown and Company, published in 2010 with illustrations by David Falconer. Thanks for joining me for Frankenstein Tea. I'm back every day at 3 o'clock with stories for adult listeners. Have a great afternoon, everybody.